triangle about comfort, function and appearance, and I'd like to welcome you to the podium, Richard. And appreciate both of you coming up. I know you've got extremely busy lives to talk to us in East Kilbride, but remembering that we'll be able to broadcast this across the world, and people are hearing about this event already. So thank you.
Good afternoon, thank you very much. Just remember it was Rajiv that took your coffee break. I could start by how long I've known Sandra or Sandy. And we were both on the same panel back in, I don't know, probably 15, 20 years ago in London on the Health Professions Council. And I was always very scared having to follow Sandy for the reason that Sandy was chair of, I believe, Education Committee, and I was chair of registration. And at each board meeting we had to sort of present a resume of what had been done and what we'd done. Sandy's was always so polished, so professional. Well, anyway, so following Sandy. My talk. I could talk as a prosthetist, which is what I am. I could talk for a long time on comfort, probably the same amount of time on function and cosmesis. There's certainly elements of pressure again when I look at essential steps to success, because I stand here feeling to some extent responsible to leave you with something, to teach you something. The way I put my talk together is very much pictures, and what I'm going to attempt to do is just to sort of punctuate that with some 25 years of experience post-qualifying as a prosthetist from the London School of Prosthetics, although I've sort of within that time had quite a few trips up to the National Centre in Glasgow. So I would say as a prosthetist you become a product of where you've worked and who you've worked with. Those are to me the sort of key moulding elements. If I look back on my time from leaving school, been made redundant twice and resigned once. Redundant from engineering, redundant from J Hanger when they lost the contracts post McColl, and then a resignation from Blatchford's in 2003. But if I look at what influenced me as a prosthetist, some of those junctures of leaving and change were very useful breaks. I qualified 88, 89, the reason I say 88, 89, failed my medical viva, so I had to reset it. But I was really lucky in that I got a job with Blatchford's when they were setting up a research unit in Basingstoke. And there were three of us, myself, Tony Morris, Colin Richardson. And what specifically Tony taught me as a prosthetist, he was just the best pair of hands there in terms of just understanding what could be done with plaster, with casts, with sockets. And he was just like that little dog that wouldn't ever let go, and that the harder that you pulled or pushed, or the greater the challenge, the greater he would work, and just the number of sockets to pursue and try and achieve something that was right was just an education on its own. So I would say that as a prosthetist, that's who we are. You as patients out there, if there's one thing that you do know as established patients, if you've found a prosthetist that does what you want them to do, that understands how to make you comfortable, how to make your sockets, then to never let them go, and I'm sure you will know and understand that. Because of my time spending 3 years in research, I took above knee casts all day, every day, and this is in that biography that's in the notes for this seminar. I learnt an awful lot about one specific type of socket. There is more, and we'll come to the triangle, but that influence has sort of etched itself on what I still do every day, which is to have my hands in plaster or plastic. Sorry, I keep trying to use the computers, but I can't get away from my plaster. What is a socket? And what is comfort? It is that thing that this slide said. It's the commonest symptom that we see. You can look at a transtibial socket and they're all being adjusted in the same place. You can look at a transfemoral socket and they're being adjusted in the same place. Or alignment is being tweaked in the order that it might correct a socket issue. Probably won't. If I sort of put into perspective where I work and what I do, because it's quite influential, I qualified in a generation where we trained as prosthetist orthotists. Depending on your interest or who'd sponsored you, you would work in one of the two disciplines. I worked for Hangers, then Blatchford, so it became lower limb prosthetics. For the past 13 years, I've run my own clinic, which is in private independent sector. Now, if these are the main reasons for limb loss, the greatest percentage are dysvascular, as you will know. Where I work or what I do is in that 10% category. They represent 90+% of the patients that I see. So we see a small number of dysvascular, but the vast majority are trauma. If I consider the approach of what we do and some bullet points of what I see as key, and this is Richard Nieveen as a prosthetist. These are my thoughts, and again, sort of punctuating this with my experience. I think the approach should be focused, and best results are achieved if it can be focused. That treatment is provided by specialists. That the multidisciplinary approach or interdisciplinary approach is the best way forward. I think education is important, and I say that not education of the health professions. I think education of patients, that we teach patients why we're doing what we're doing, that they come into the workshops, that they see how we make things, because I think giving patients that involvement, that access, that open door to what's being done, that understanding of we make things the way we do because these are the parameters that we work in. I think that educational aspect is very important to what we provide, and that it's individual. You know, every patient is individual, as every socket is individual to every patient. This is Rajiv's slide. Now, I'll kind of go to the bottom and the participation, and that follows on from what I've just said. That the most important thing as a prosthetist, and those of you that are prosthetists out there and there are more patients will understand, I think the greatest position we can achieve is where, as a prosthetist, you can trust your patient, and as a patient, you can trust your prosthetist. And the reason for saying that is, through my early years of standing in lectures and listening to lectures, speakers would stand up and say, I'm not here to tell you what I know, I'm here to tell you all the things that I don't know, or that there are many more questions than there are answers. What I would say, and what I've learned, is that there is so much grey in prosthetics. There's so much grey in medicine, there's very little black and white. And it can be, at some points in time, it could be wrong to expose that because you want the confidence of your patient. I think what you learn after 25 years, and Rajiv taught me this probably 15 years ago, the greatest strength or position you can hold is to learn to say no. Rajiv will talk of a doctor going through training of 7 years and then 5 years of learning how to use plaster, and then the next 5 years just learning when the right thing is actually to do nothing. As a prosthetist, I think that's quite difficult for the reason that if we go back to this grey, it's the unknown and uncertainty. I think we always buy default, feel as a prosthetist we just might be able to find another way. We might have the answer. Sometimes we might be lucky, sometimes we might be unlucky and we get it wrong. And Rajiv in his last slide referred to that communication of getting it wrong. But that's who we are as default, as prosthetists or orthotists. If we look at the application of what we do, then there are changes, and we've heard changes today from Alan and others. There are different ways there are different clinical tools. There is in technology change of force plates. We've got joints that give us data back, so no longer are we looking at somebody walking up and down, adjusting a flexion and extension to control the knee control. We've got a computer screen telling us what to do or not to do. So there are certainly changes, and lots of those are positive changes, and I do believe making a difference. And I'll come on towards the end on my sort of thoughts on technology. If we go back to the process, I am an advocate of high intensity. One of the early speakers made reference, or might have been you, sir, of saying, I think you talked about 4 weeks from one appointment to the next. If as a prosthetist you take a cast and then you see the patients 4 weeks later, you can't expect it. If that patient is in early stages, you can't expect that to work or flow. So I'm lucky, I can take a cast in the morning, fit a socket in the afternoon, a trial socket that the patient will take away the following day. So I'm talking about that intensity and those episodes and working very interactively with the physio, because you will know as patients, it's probably the prosthetist and the physio that you will spend most time around or be with. The triangle. This is the original triangle. Now, Rajiv called me about a year ago, well, 13 months ago, because he was doing his homework for this event, and said, Richard, have you got that? Have you got some slides on this? And I said, well, I've got better. I've got a 3M yellow post-it pinned on the board of my workshop. Now, it's been on and off that board and off the floor for, it's got to be 20 years. I'm thinking, daughter's 16, it's before. It's 16 to 20 years ago. So, yeah, it's on the board. Go to the workshop, it's not on the board. Panic. Pull the drape table out, it's on the floor. How it hadn't been swept up yet. I know now when I go back, I'm going to frame it, and it's worth a lot of money. Rajiv's son, Ravi, and this goes back to then. So these are, I might have drawn the triangle, and there's Rajiv's numbers in there. And it was that he'd take it away because Ravi is a bit of a maths genius. So we'll give it to Ravi as an algorithm when I'm still waiting for it to come back. But in sitting where you are now looking at this, as a prosthetist, you'll find a practical way of doing it. And I'm going to have sort of moving bits of string and just slide it. It'll be like a slide rule. Do a bit of sailing, so I understand slide rules and trigonometry. Yeah, it's, how do I use it? There's a very obvious, isn't there? If you want to, there's been lots of sport today, and I'm going to talk a bit about sport. Luckily, I went to Rio. Is if you're going to make a prosthesis a specific activity limb or a dedicated, however you want to call it, it's got to be comfortable, it's going to be very functional, it's not going to look like a leg. If you want to make a high definition, it's not going to be, you're going to compromise on the function, but you're going to maximise on the appearance. Anyway, it will still be going round, I'm sure, for another 16 years. This is probably where we can learn from it, and I would say this is where I'm kind of not so good. Decision making is empirical, experience-based, best practice. I know that, I get that. It's very true that there aren't many good hard numbers of data. If we look for that in sockets, you go back to a chap called Robin Redhead, who worked in Roehampton as one of the medical doctors, and he did the pioneering work on total surface bearing that is since acknowledged by Oscar Christensen and others. That's one of the few papers out there, and that was his PhD thesis from 1970 something, I'm guessing. If you take away another thing, which is if you've got that good prosthetist, never let him or her go, is to chop through everything, good surgery, you're in the position of where you're in, so you know that decision has been made. But three things in achieving what might be an ideal or what could be considered the best outcomes. It's good surgery, good socket, and good training and re-education, which says physiotherapist in terms of lower extremity prosthetics. Sockets, I've got the status of a socket anorak. What is it? It's the interface between patient and prosthesis, importance of surface matching. Technology has changed, the use of gels, silicones, we've mentioned OSSA and ISROS and tech and all the other work that's been done. But if we consider it maybe just a sort of jump on, if we look at the forces that are taking place, you've got rotational, you've got longitudinal, depending on what the activities are. And I think important when you're looking at activities and higher activities, and there have been some interesting presentations of patients where you've been sort of running up and down hills, is to understand reaction and forces, because if you walk and we put a plate down, then the loads, ground reaction, 1.3, 1.5 times body weight. If we were to run or if I were to jump off the stage, it would jump to sort of 3 times or a little bit more. I've done quite a bit of work with British athletics over the last 10 years, and 2012 and 16, etc. And the biomet people in Loughborough measure or will record 10 times body weight for a long jumper hitting the platform at takeoff. 10 times. So kind of think just not so much to do electron socket design, but just think about those loads going through and what you're doing and all of those sort of forces. If we look at it as a process, then you assess, you cast, data capture, diagnostic sockets, etc., etc. So this is our cast, data capture, might be a computer, probably not with me, could be plaster. This is, I guess this is one of my therapies when I'm not sailing, then I'm probably happiest here with my hands in plaster. It's how I grew up, it's something that I just still have a bug, a passion for, and you know, there will be other prosthetists out in this room that get that, because it's here where we're just trying to make that difference. There are tools that make this easier, diagnostic materials, and I would say there's a typical process with us. We take a cast, we use Transplex, which is like a Perspex material as a first stage. We then use something called Thermalin, and that's a clear material that we can send a patient home on. Might put a resin bandage around it to make it secure. Force plates, laser aligning apparatus, these tools allow us all the assessments in between, where it used to be take a cast and build a socket and hope that it works. We should know before we build that final definitive socket that we're going to get the result. So materials have made a difference in the use, but this is time. This is time. Now, I hear it again and again that Richard, we don't have the time. You have the time, we don't have the time. A Swedish prosthetist, Gunnar Holmgren, in a study back in 1960 said 40% of the cost of P&O supplier are because we don't get it right the first time. I would say that's still true today. You don't have the time, but you have got the time to make it again, or a third time, or a fourth time. Just, preparation, preparation, preparation. If it's invested here, we should get better result. Easily said when I suppose I work in the environment that I work in. Very quick snapshot of a development, and this is something that Blatchford's over there have worked on, and this is a perforated liner, which we played around with I would say, with success, and the idea of it is to wick away moisture from the skin liner interface. So there are products such as this that are making a difference and making the fitting of a socket more effective. If we look at technology, what can technology do? So this is Steph Reed, silver medal in Rio, silver medal in London. Jumps about 570, so she weighs 60 kg. So at takeoff, 600 going through that blade, and this slide here is a slow motion image of, this is 2009, so it's sort of first generation carbon blades, but it's probably jumping about 5 meters here. In terms of technology, does attaching something, is that going to make us all jump? No. She was an elite level athlete before, and it's that that's going to make the difference. But blades and more functional componentry, I think, does make a difference and is a benefit. I mean, if we look at energy, then what we've got is, if you looked at Steph running, you've got kinetic energy being stored in the blade, and then that's released. So her kinetic being stored and then released potential energy. If a prop here, then an easy way to explain it